Hey, what's up, everybody? Justin here again. And now that the new Yoroiden Samurai Troopers anime, or officially known as Yoroiden Samurai Troopers, is now airing upon the recording of this review, I figured that now would be a good time to review the original series, which became Ronin Warriors in the US, which I'll talk about why that title change was made. So yes, I'm presently watching the new series because I grew up watching and enjoying the original series, which came, even though the anime premiered in Japan in the late 80s, it didn't really make its North American debut until the summer of 1995 on UPN, or at least it was airing on UPN in the middle of 95 when I was watching it, and then it disappeared for a while, and then it was on Sci-Fi for a couple years later, and then in '99 it came to Toonami, where it found a whole new audience. Even though its Toonami debut was like 10 years after it debuted in Japan. So yes, this anime was pretty much, there are stories that say it was inspired by the popularity of Saint Seiya at the time. So, you in this particular story, you have 5 teenage boys who don special, armors of different color, like a Super Sentai. But instead of being inspired by Greek mythology, they're inspired by, traditional samurai armor. But it's kind of given more of like a mechanized look. Even though they're not very, machine operated, you're supposed to think of them, let's say, as, traditional samurai armor. So, so it's about how one day in 1989, a bunch of demons called the Yoja, or the Nether Realm warlords, they show up in the middle of Shinjuku Station, specifically the East Exit area, where, they just show up and they're here to take over the world. I would insert the M. Bison, of course, saying, but no, I don't want to do any editing this time. I just want to make this organic. But yes, and all of a sudden, 5 boys just show up, just to fight this one, evil Yoja soldier. And in the midst of it, in the first episode, he kidnaps a young woman named Mia, or Nasty in the original Japanese version. And then you have Yui, or June, and he, puts them inside the TV of the old Alta building, which actually got demolished in the summer of 2025, unfortunately. So, yes, eventually after that, they defeat him, and it was like, okay, he was just a foot soldier. They have yet to fight the 4 generals of the 4 warlords of Talpa, or Arago in the Japanese version. He's like the demon lord of this evil Japanese dimension kind of thing. And in the original Japanese version, the 4 warlords were like, also daimyos from feudal Japan. And now they must unite to, fight this evil warlord. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So the plot is very much straightforward. It's very much an action-oriented series. In terms of the story, you don't really get much background with the original cast. In the English version, the main characters are Ryo, Sai, Sage, Rowan, and Kento. But in the original Japanese version, Ryo's name is pronounced in the original Japanese pronunciation of Ryo. Sai is Shin. I'm trying to remember. Kento is Shu. He's a Chinese-Japanese character. Sage is more like a, Anglicization of his Japanese name, Seiji. And Rowan's name was called Toma in Japanese. So yes, pretty much like Ryo or Ryo, whatever pronunciation you want to use, depending which version you watch. He represents Rekka, or wildfire. Sai is torrent. Sage is I think it was wind or something like that. And then Rowan was Strata, Kanto was Hard Rock. And then they all represent these elements. And yes, And then eventually, and throughout their war with Talpa or Arago, they kind of learn, the origins of their armors. Yeah, it does have a story, but there's really kind of no reason, like, hey, how do these teenage boys, get their armor? I'm pretty sure there are external sources, such as drama CDs, where that explains those stories, but unfortunately, I have no access to them, nor do I own them at the moment. So that's like the only main gripe I have with it. But pretty much it does tell stories like, hey, there's a threat here, and they got to deal with it, and that's pretty much the focus of it. But of course, like, we like to learn is like, not only do you want to learn about their origins, like how did they get their hands on the armor, what kind of training did they have to go through, and all that other stuff. So that's like one of the things that I'm curious about. But I'm also sure that there's a manga to it that may explain these things, and I may own it, but if I do, I might have it back home in my parents' house in Arizona. And if I do have it, and just like a lot of other manga that I bought the last 20 years, I have yet to get around to reading to it. So yes, the story is very much straight to the point with what it needs to do, and they just got to fight these threats and all that other stuff. And it does what it does, but I think it could have done more with its story. But you do see the characters interact, they grow as a group, they grow as individuals, but I would kind of wish we kind of had more than just the starting point of where we got with the first episode. And you kind of eventually learn, also about the origin of the armors, and I don't want to go into spoiler territories with that. And I really do like how, they kind of go into it, and like how the certain virtues or the codes of the Bushido, their armors represent, kind of like codify how they can be used and whatnot. Especially as it pertains to Arago, the main villain. Like, take for example, Ryo, he represents Jin, or it's called virtue in English. Sai is Shin, or trust. Seiji is Rei, or grace, but for some reason they call it wisdom. But it's really grace, or courtesy, or grace in Japanese. Shu, or Kento, he is Gi, or justice. And what was his name? Rowan, he is Chi, which is really wisdom, but for some reason they call it Inochi, or life in English, which was wrong. And I say this as a Japanese speaker, and I'm certified N1 in Japanese. So I have the authority to make these corrections. And I also work as a professional translator. But, either way, like, when this came to the US, like, when it came to anime in, overseas, especially North America, it was never really, let's say, promoted as anime, and a lot of its Japanese-ness was taken out. Especially, when you brought, let's say, Macross to the US as Robotech, like, it lost most of its Japanese origins, or Yamato as Star Blazers, or Maha Go 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 as Speed Racer, and so on. So at the time, the Japanese-ness was just, taken out in its localization. I'm not here to say that's a good or a bad thing, that's just the way it was at the time. And even though Samurai Troopers changed its name, so I'll kind of get into that right now. So I'm pretty sure they wanted to keep the Ocean Studios, I know, dubbed it, but I'm trying to remember, maybe Viz got the rights to it, I'm not sure. But I'm pretty sure they wanted to keep the original title of Samurai Troopers, but because of perceived copyright issues, especially with Saban, like they had two series with Samurai and Troopers in it, like VR Troopers, which was really Metalder, and what was it? Superhuman Samurai Squad, Gridman in Japanese. So because of this, they didn't want to, like, let's say, get in a copyright dispute with Saban, especially in the 90s, especially they said, in Suburban Commando, they said, I remember it's like, hey, what we're gonna do to you, Hulk Hogan? It's like, no, you're gonna try and pound my face, and aren't you? And the biker dude says, no, this is the 90s, we're gonna sue you. So it was the 90s back then, so they probably feared a lawsuit, so which is why they had to go with Ronin Warriors, and Ronin meaning, masterless samurai. I thought that was a very appropriate, name to it, since the Ronin Warrior, since the characters were masterless. I thought that worked, in my opinion. So yeah. So, they really kept the Japaneseness in it despite changing the names of the characters and, despite messing up the name of the kanji. So it's like the first time ever I saw an anime on network television in the US where it kept the Japaneseness, like, they kept the original characters and all that. So this was like kind of like my first exposure to learning about, Japanese kanji in a sense. Like, even though I've seen it before, like, no one tells you what it means because of, let's say, how Orientalism, I know that sounds a little racist, but I'm using the word to describe, the East Asia, the Far East in an exotic sense. We kind of had that mentality back then. And that mentality sort of carried over here, but this is the first time ever that, you're showed a character, a kanji character, and you're being told what it means. Even though it might have been wrong for the most part. It was like, hey, every for at least over 30 days straight you're exposed to these characters, and by the time the series is over you could probably see it in a different context, like maybe go to a karate dojo, you see for example the kanji for gi, you could be saying, oh, that means justice, or you could say shin and it's like, oh, that means trust. Or you can see chi, and it's like, oh, that means life, but that really means wisdom. So I kind of really like, for the first time ever, you're seeing characters and you're being told what it means. So I kind of really appreciated that. So it's just really at the time, I was really new to anime at the time, especially from an artistic point of view. And I think a lot of the appeal, especially when you're coming into this, in the 90s, when anime is rather new, it's like you're really being drawn into the aesthetic of it because you never really seen anything like this at the time. And even though anime has always existed on, North American television through Speed Racer or Star Blazers and Robotech, you're kind of finally getting the context of something that's originally from Japan. You're getting something that's authentically Japanese. You're showing that it takes place in Tokyo. You're getting exposed to kanji characters. They're wearing armor that's, of Japanese samurai origin and all this other stuff. So, you're getting something that's authentically Japanese. And I think that's why, this series, especially to, Gen X, Zennials, and older millennials, I represent the Zennials, this is something that's really special to me. Yeah, in the long scheme of things, maybe it's not that special to a lot of people, but to someone like me, it's really, really special. Of course, I'm not someone who watches, I have not watched the dub since 2010. And at the time, the dub really worked. Even to this day, I could really go back to it, and I wouldn't really mind watching the dub. You got Matt Hill. I recognize his voice as Captain N. He voices Ryo. And I remember a lot of Fatal Fury voices also doing, the voices in this one later on. Like the guy who plays Joe plays Kento. And I think the guy who plays Ryoga in Ranma 1/2 voices Sage. And I think the guy who plays the master from the first Fatal Fury OVA voices Talpa. And the guy who plays Geese voices Sekhmet. And I remember the voice of, what was her name? Mia. I think she was like the original voice of Bulma in Dragon Ball Z. So this was Ocean Studios. They also voiced Fatal Fury and Ranma, so it was appropriate to hear. So it's appropriate to hear these familiar voices. And the Japanese cast was also stacked as well, like Kusao Takashi, most famous the voice of Trunks from Dragon Ball Z, Sakuragi from Slam Dunk. He's the voice of Ryo in in the original Japanese version. And I'm pretty sure the original Japanese cast also has some very famous names, but I can't really remember off the top of my head. Maybe I should write scripts like I used to before, but just saying what's on my mind. So yes, you can enjoy this either in Japanese or in English. All in all, it pretty much, essentially tells the same story, though there are some, major changes. Like one major change is apparently the original Ronin Warrior named Hariel, who dons the original Infernal armor. And, eventually halfway in, Ryo gets a different armor, a power-up per se, called the Armor of Inferno. And keep in mind, they were also selling the toys back in '95. And the mentality behind this, especially when, back between the mid-'80s and the mid-'90s, cartoons were vehicles for toy commercials. you know, like they didn't want to like sell Rio twice per se, so they just said, you know, this isn't Rio, this is Heriel, Rio's ancestor, I guess. So just to be consistent with the toys, you know, merchandising, they just had to make up the story that, you know, Heriel, you know, was the original donor of the infernal armor, but that was never true in the Japanese version. So, you know, you got Ronald Reagan to thank for that, I guess. But anyway, going on. So either way, it essentially tells the same story. You know, you go through the same journey and everything. And I also enjoy that in the dub version, they kept the original, you know, soundtrack within the series. The theme songs, both in Japanese, you know, the English theme song, it works for an American audience. But yeah, the Japanese theme songs, they are definitely fire, especially, you know, Samurai Heart. I really love that one. And I also love the ending theme song, So Far Away. And of course, in the original, in the new version, in one of the, I think at episode 5, they actually do play the original theme song, which I thought was pretty badass. So yeah, if you want like a pure soundtrack, watch the Japanese version as it pertains to the opening and ending themes. But the background tracks in the episodes themselves, they maintain, you know, the original Japanese tracks, which is awesome. So if you're looking for, you know, a pretty good classic or something that's like very near to dear to Zenyo, such as myself, you know, this is an anime to watch. And if you're watching the new one, and if you want to watch the original, definitely watch the original.